The night is still. It's quiet. Too quiet. You can hear the wind whistling through the trees outside your window. The only source of light comes from the flickering screen of your phone as you scroll endlessly, looking for something to distract you from the creeping feeling that you're being watched. Suddenly, a notification pops up. It's a new video from your favorite YouTube channel. The title sends chills down your spine. 3 scary, true pizza delivery horror stories. You hesitate for a moment before clicking play. These are their stories. The clock ticked past midnight, casting an eerie glow on the stack of pizza boxes piled high on the counter. The silence of the night was only broken by the occasional hum of the refrigerator. John, a college student working the graveyard shift at Tony's pizzeria, rubbed his tired eyes and glanced nervously out the window. The darkness outside seemed to press against the glass, making him feel even more isolated. The street was deserted, illuminated only by the flickering neon sign outside the shop. The occasional rustle of leaves in the wind added to the eerie atmosphere. The phone on the wall jangled, startling John. He jumped slightly, his heart racing as he reached for the receiver. He answered on the second ring, his voice thick with sleep. "Tony's Pizzeria, how can I help you?" he mumbled. A raspy voice on the other end of the line gave an address. The voice was unsettling, sending a shiver down John's spine. It was an area on the outskirts of town, notorious for its dilapidated buildings and questionable characters. John hesitated, feeling a sense of dread. Despite his better judgment, John punched the address into the system. He knew it was risky, but he couldn't afford to lose his job. He couldn't shake off the uneasy feeling that settled in his gut. It gnawed at him, making him question his decision. The voice on the phone had been odd, almost inhuman. It echoed in his mind, making him feel even more uneasy. Shaking off his apprehension, John prepared the order, a large pepperoni pizza with extra cheese and a 2-liter bottle of soda. He moved quickly, trying to ignore the growing sense of dread. He grabbed his well-worn jacket and headed out into the night. The cold air hit him, making him shiver. As he drove, the streetlights became sparser, replaced by the menacing shadows of abandoned buildings. The darkness seemed to close in around him. John tried to focus on the radio, but the static only amplified his unease. He switched stations, but nothing seemed to help. He finally arrived at the address, a crumbling Victorian mansion at the end of a gravel driveway. The house looked like it hadn't been lived in for years. The house loomed before him, its windows dark and lifeless. It seemed to watch him, making him feel even more uneasy. John parked his beat-up Honda Civic at the curb, his pulse quickening with each step toward the front porch. The gravel crunched under his feet, echoing in the silence. He rang the doorbell, its chime echoing ominously through the silence. The sound seemed to linger, making him feel even more on edge. He waited, but there was no answer. The silence was deafening, making him feel even more isolated. John rang the bell again, his unease growing. He glanced around, feeling like he was being watched. He could have sworn he saw a flicker of movement in one of the upstairs windows, but when he looked again, there was nothing. His heart raced, and he felt a chill run down his spine. Just then, he noticed something strange. A shadow seemed to move in the corner of his eye. There was a faint, sweet smell in the air, something akin to rotting fruit. It was sickening, making him feel nauseous. He took a step back, his hand instinctively reaching for the pepper spray attached to his keychain. He felt a sense of urgency, knowing he needed to be prepared. He decided to give it one more try. S1, Tony's Pizzeria. This is John speaking. His voice wavered slightly, betraying his nerves. "Can I take your order?" He waited, hoping for a response.
"Hello, is anyone here?" Narrator, silence. The silence was oppressive, making him feel even more uneasy. John's heart pounded in his chest. He could hear it in his ears, loud and insistent. He knew he should just leave, but something held him there. It was as if he was rooted to the spot. It was as if an unseen force was compelling him to stay. He felt a strange pull, urging him to go further. Taking a deep breath, he reached for the doorknob. His hand trembled slightly as he grasped it. To his surprise, it was unlocked. He hesitated for a moment before pushing it open. He pushed the door open slowly, the hinges groaning in protest. The sound was loud in the silence, making him wince. The stench that hit him was overwhelming, a putrid mix of decay and something else he couldn't quite place. It was almost unbearable. The air inside the house was heavy and still, as if it had been undisturbed for decades. It felt suffocating. Cobwebs hung from every corner and dust covered every surface. It was clear no one had been here for a long time. John took a tentative step inside, his eyes struggling to adjust to the gloom. S1. He felt a sense of foreboding, knowing he was stepping into the unknown. "Hello? Pizza delivery?" His voice echoed in the empty space, making him feel even more alone.
The only response was the sound of his own voice. It bounced off the walls, creating an eerie effect. Bouncing off the dusty walls, the silence that followed was almost deafening. He took another step forward, his senses on high alert. Every creak and groan of the old house made him jump. Sarah checked the address on the pizza box again, her brow furrowed in confusion. She had been delivering pizzas for years, but this was a first. She was sure she was in the right place, a modern apartment complex with a well-lit parking lot. Everything seemed normal, at least on the surface, but the apartment number on the box, 13B, seemed to be missing. It was as if it had vanished into thin air. She scanned the rows of doors again, but there was no 13B to be found. The hallway seemed to stretch endlessly, adding to her growing unease. Just as she was about to call the customer, the door to apartment 13A swung open with a creak that echoed down the hallway. A young woman with fiery red hair and piercing green eyes stood in the doorway, her expression a mixture of annoyance and impatience. S2. "Yes, ma'am," Sarah stammered, trying to maintain her composure. "I have a pizza for... Well, it looks like apartment 13B, but I can't seem to find it. It's like it doesn't exist." "I'm so sorry, ma'am, this has never happened before. I'll double-check with the store. Maybe there's been a mistake." The woman's frown deepened, her eyes narrowing as if she was trying to solve a puzzle. Sarah glanced down at the pizza box again, her confusion mounting. The address was clearly printed, but it led nowhere. The address was clearly printed on the label. There was no mistake on her end. The woman's eyes narrowed, and for a moment Sarah thought she saw a flicker of something dark and menacing in their depths. "S2, I understand, ma'am, but I need to follow protocol. But I'm afraid I can't just leave the pizza. It's against company policy. I need to ensure it goes to the right person." "I'm sorry, ma'am, but I can't just give you the pizza. I need to see some proof of identity. I need to see some proof that you're who you say you are. It's company policy." The woman's eyes widened in anger, and she took a step closer to Sarah, her body practically vibrating with rage. The tension was palpable. "I'm calling the police. This is unacceptable."
The old house stood at the end of a long, winding drive, shrouded in an eerie silence that seemed to amplify the feeling of dread that had been building in my stomach ever since I'd received the delivery order. The trees lining the driveway seemed to close in, their branches like skeletal fingers reaching out to grab me. It was a large order, enough to feed a small army, and the address was in the middle of nowhere. The isolation of the place only added to the unsettling atmosphere. I tried calling the customer back to confirm, but the line had gone dead after one ring. Narrator, Chapter 3.
David parked his car at the edge of the property, hesitant to get any closer. The gravel crunched under his tires, sounding unnaturally loud in the oppressive silence. The house loomed before him, its silhouette stark against the backdrop of the moonless night sky. It looked like something out of a horror movie, a place where nightmares were born. The windows were dark, like empty eyes staring out into the night, and the paint peeled off the walls like scabs on an old wound. The house seemed to be decaying from the inside out. It was the kind of house that seemed to radiate an aura of unease, as if it were harboring secrets best left undisturbed. The air around it felt heavy, almost suffocating.
I took a deep breath, trying to calm my nerves. My hands were shaking, and I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. I was a delivery driver, not a ghost hunter. This was supposed to be a simple job, not an episode of a paranormal investigation show. I told myself it was just another delivery, no different from any other. But the eerie silence and the oppressive atmosphere made it hard to believe that. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't quite right. It was as if the house itself was watching me, waiting for me to make a move.
He grabbed the stack of pizzas and the 2-liter bottles of soda, his hands trembling slightly as he stepped out of the car. The weight of the food seemed to anchor him to reality, but only just. The air was thick with humidity, and the only sound was the chirping of crickets in the distance. Even the insects seemed to be keeping their distance from the house. David made his way up the creaking porch steps, his every instinct screaming at him to turn around and run. Each step felt like a step closer to something unknown and terrifying.
I reached the front door, its paint peeling and cracked, and raised my hand to knock. The wood felt cold and unwelcoming under my knuckles. But before my knuckles could connect with the wood, the door creaked open on its own, as if inviting me inside. The sound echoed in the still night, sending a chill down my spine. I hesitated, my heart pounding in my chest. The open door felt like a mouth, ready to swallow me whole. I could feel a cold draft emanating from the open doorway, sending shivers down my spine. "Hello? Pizza delivery?" My voice sounded small and uncertain.
There was no answer, but David could have sworn he heard the faint sound of whispers coming from deep within the house. The whispers seemed to beckon him further inside. He took a tentative step inside, his eyes struggling to adjust to the gloom. The darkness seemed to swallow the light from the doorway. The air inside was stale and heavy, thick with the scent of decay and something else he couldn't quite place. It smelled like death. The odor was almost tangible, clinging to his clothes and skin.
I took another step forward, my senses on high alert. Every creak and groan of the house seemed amplified in the silence. The floorboards creaked ominously beneath my feet, and I could hear the sound of my own breathing echoing in the silence. It was as if the house itself was breathing with me.
He made his way down a long, narrow hallway, the walls lined with faded portraits of people who seemed to stare at him with accusing eyes. The eyes in the portraits seemed to follow his every move. As he reached the end of the hallway, he noticed a faint light flickering in the distance. It was the only source of illumination in the otherwise pitch-black house. He cautiously approached the light, his pulse quickening with each step. The flickering light cast eerie shadows on the walls, making the portraits look even more sinister. As he got closer, he realized the light was coming from a single flickering candle, perched precariously on a small table in what appeared to be the living room. The candle's flame danced, casting ghostly shapes on the walls.
The room was sparsely furnished, with only a few pieces of heavy, antique furniture scattered about. The furniture looked like it hadn't been used in years. The furniture was draped in white sheets, giving the room the appearance of a mausoleum. It felt like a place where time had stopped. In the center of the room was a fireplace, its hearth cold and empty. The ashes in the fireplace looked like they hadn't been disturbed in decades. But what chilled me to the bone was the sight of a figure sitting in a rocking chair in the corner, its back to me. The chair rocked slowly, as if moved by an unseen hand. My breath caught in my throat. The figure's presence was overwhelming, filling the room with a sense of dread.
As the screen fades to black, the echoes of their terrifying tales linger in the air. You glance over your shoulder into the shadows of your own room, wondering what might be lurking just out of sight. The next time you order a pizza, you might think twice before answering the door. If you enjoyed these stories and want to hear more, be sure to like this video, leave a comment down below, and subscribe to the channel for more scary stories. Sleep tight, and don't forget to check under the bed.